President Trump lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton by nearly 3 million ballots. He says that's because of 3 to 5 million illegal votes cast for his election opponent. And despite offering no evidence of any voter fraud, the president tweeted Wednesday, "I will be asking for a major investigation into voter fraud, including those registered to vote in 2 states, those who are illegal, and even those registered to vote who are dead. Depending on results, we will strengthen up voting procedures." He had promised to issue an executive action concerning voter fraud on Thursday, but has since pushed that back. Myrna Perez is the deputy director of the Brennan Center's Democracy Program and leader of the center's Voting Rights and Elections Project. And she joins me now. Myrna, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just start with some basics here. Sure. What is voter fraud exactly, and how widespread is it?
Voter fraud is the concept of committing fraud upon an election. So someone coming in purposely trying to manipulate the outcome. Voter fraud can take many forms, ranging from someone pretending to be someone else. It can involve an insider, for example, someone running for office, stuffing the ballot box. It can be someone trying to manipulate the outcome by hacking a voting machines. So there's a wide variety of voter fraud there's a wide range of things that can be called voter fraud. And what I find so frustrating about this conversation is the fact that the president has been conflating many different kinds of voter fraud. In the beginning, he talked about people who were non-citizens voting. Now he's talking about registration errors. That's not fraud. It is not in dispute that our voter registration rolls need to be cleaned up. People die every day, people move every day, people get married every day and change their names. It's not possible to have 100% up-to-date voter rolls at every single moment of the day. And those need to be changed. We need to do our best to have clean rolls. But to say that mistakes on the rolls is the equivalent of fraud is not true. It's irresponsible and it's inflammatory.
So he wants an investigation. What could that look like?
There's not enough details for us to know. One thing that I would be very concerned about is if there was an investigation that wasn't independent, if it wasn't evidence-based, if it didn't have the right kinds of experts on it who actually understand how elections work and how voter fraud is committed. It's again important for me to state that just because there are mistakes on the rolls doesn't mean that there's this massive conspiracy of people trying to game the system.
What about the argument that I've heard that in fact, it may just be so hard to detect, and that's why an investigation is needed, is because you sometimes can have this kind of fraud take place, and it's not necessarily something that would be readily visible.
There are a lot of systems in place and a lot of checks in place to try and detect fraud. And again, the ease of detection depends upon what kind of fraud it is. If you have an insider, like someone in cahoots with a poll worker, that might be harder to detect than a person pretending to be someone else trying to show up at the polls. And I think the conversation that the president is starting is one in which all of these things get mushed in together, things that are errors get conflated with things where they're purposeful manipulation, and that's not the way that is working now. That's not what we see happening. We see election administrators across the country doing their best to make sure our elections are free, fair, and accessible, and secure. We see voters having barriers being placed in front of them that are needless. Like, no one is talking about the fact that it's very hard for some voters to be able to get to the polls on election day because there's not enough early voting opportunities, or we don't have enough opportunities for people to register in a bunch of different ways, or that our voting machines are old and outdated and are not very accessible. There are a lot of ways in which we can and should improve our election system, and that is not in dispute. What is disputed is the fact that the claim that there is massive widespread fraud, because that is not true. There is no evidence supporting that.
All right, give us some context here. If this claim were true, what would that mean for our democracy?
If there was massive widespread voter fraud, which in fact there is not, we would need to take measures to correct that. Obviously, the sanctity of the ballot box is paramount, and everybody should feel free and have secure and confidence in our elections. Election administrators across the country, irrespective of their political stripe, have come out saying, I am defending the polls, I am protecting the polls, I am protecting voters, and we have measures in place to make sure that we don't have voter fraud on this kind of level.
And we haven't seen lawmakers, for instance, on Capitol Hill necessarily talking about initiating their own investigations.
No, in fact, you are seeing people on Capitol Hill, including Republicans, saying, it doesn't go down like this. It is not happening to that level. Yes, there's going to be the isolated miscreant. That is not in dispute. That is not new. But to imply that there is this widespread voter fraud conspiracy and that we need to take measures to ensure the security of the rolls, as a civil rights lawyer, that makes me really nervous that this is going to be a justification for the kinds of suppressive actions that we have seen throughout this history of trying to keep some people from voting.
All right, we'll continue to watch it. Myrna Perez from the Brennan Center, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.